Well, hey guys, today we're in Aberdeen, Mississippi, and I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named Sydney Jonas. Mr. Jonas once wrote a poem back in 1865 that went, well, viral, as things went viral back in those days. No, of course, there was no internet at the close of the Civil War, but there was print media. After the war, Mr. Jonas returned to Aberdeen and established the Aberdeen Examiner and became its editor for 50 years. This is the old Aberdeen Examiner building. I think we'll make our way out to Oddfellows Rest Cemetery and let Mr. Jonas basically tell you his story. I think this is a beautiful old cemetery, and as we walk toward Mr. Jonas's grave, I need for you to boop that like button, or maybe even share on your favorite form of social media or subscribe. During the Civil War, Sydney Jonas was a major in the Confederate Army on General Stephen D. Lee's staff. At the conclusion of the Civil War, he made his way to Richmond, Virginia, in hopes of finding transportation to his home here in Aberdeen. When you were as far away as Richmond, Virginia, you had to try to seek some form of transportation to come back to northeast Mississippi. Oh yeah, guys, there's another interesting gravesite just over here. During the Battle of Okolona, Colonel Jeffrey Forrest, Major General Nathan Bedford Forrest's youngest brother, was killed, and his fiancée lived here in Aberdeen, and so for a time he was brought here and buried until they could move him to Memphis after the Civil War. Anyway, let's get back to Major Jonas. You know, as I said earlier, at the conclusion of the war, Major Jonas made his way to Richmond in hopes of seeking transportation to Aberdeen. He and some of the folks that were traveling with him were broke, but the owner of the Powhatan Hotel allowed them to stay there for the night. While a guest at the Powhatan, Jonas wrote a poem, sort of a dirge to the Confederacy, entitled Lines on the Back of a Confederate Note. Years later, Mr. Jonas gave an account of how the poem came to be. This account was published in Watson's magazine. Mr. Jonas tells that among the guests of the hotel was a vaudeville troupe from Philadelphia, and they were very kind to the Johnny Rebs, as they called us. One of the things the United States had captured was a train carload of unfinished Confederate notes. They were a fairly large denomination, and the backs were blank. A lady named Annie Rush, which was an actress in the vaudeville troupe, sort of appropriated a bunch of this Confederate money. She distributed the money to her Johnny Rebs and requested that they write her a sentiment on the back of it as a souvenir. Mr. Jonas says, I had some little standing among the boys as a ready scribbler, and I think I wrote all the sentiments for the gang on scratch paper, each one transcribing his offering upon the blank note allotted him. Upon my bill, I unwillingly wrote the lines that struck a chord with the public. If I had chosen from the lot, I would have possibly taken one of the other poems as mine. Major Jonas goes on to say, of course, I did not appreciate my work, writers seldom do, and would have forgotten it but for the fact that the recipient gave it, or a copy of it, to the New York Metropolitan Record. The New York Metropolitan Record had a tremendous circulation in the South, and the poem appeared in it a few months after the war over Major Jonas's signature. Since that moment, the poem appeared in almost every newspaper and magazine in the South, and in many northern publications as well. The poem appeared in the Congressional Library Almanac, in foreign newspapers and books of war poems, and apparently, many times when it was published, it would be attributed to other people or just simply as anonymous. As we showed you earlier, after returning home, Mr. Jonas established the Aberdeen Examiner, which stayed into existence until about 15 or 20 years ago. And listen to this obituary that was written about him when he passed away on September 13th, 1915. This obituary appeared in Confederate Veteran magazine. Wielding a powerful pen possessed of encyclopedic information, he was a match for any of the molders of opinion throughout this great land, and undoubtedly could have discharged with eminent distinction and satisfaction the duties of any editorial tripod in any of its great cities. Dedicating the magnificent powers of his royal manhood to the service of his adopted state, he wrought his brain and heart and soul to the fibers of her civic life. Boy, my goodness, we just don't write like that anymore. Mr. Jonas's poem certainly went viral, as things did back in the 1860s, and he garnered all kinds of attention simply because he followed the wishes of the actress Miss Sydney Rush and wrote it on the back of a Confederate note. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the story about going viral in the 1860s, and hope you'll check out some of the other videos my kids and I have put together for your enjoyment. Thank you.